Hello ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here. You may be wondering why I'm filming in this rather, how would you say, obtuse, rustic location. But essentially, I'm getting a bit bored of filming with plain white backdrops behind me, so I thought I'd film somewhere a little bit different. You see, I wanted to go out and about filming today, but unfortunately, there's just too much noise pollution for my microphone to deal with. If I go out on this island into the countryside, I have to deal with cicada bugs going eh. Or if I'm anywhere near civilization, I have to deal with bloody mopeds and quad bikes with all their noise pollution. If I was the mayor of this town, I would outlaw those modes of transport straight away. They're just so annoying and unnecessary, aren't they? Like, why can't people just drive bicycles and cars like normal people? It's bloody outrageous, isn't it? So anyway, today I am filming in the unfinished wing of my family's holiday home, because as I said, I just thought it would make a nice change to the boring white backdrop. So instead you can look at bloody tools and all stuff like that behind me instead. So before we start today's video, I thought I would give you a little channel update. I would like to thank each and every one of you, because over the last month this channel has been on an absolutely huge upswing. Watch time for this month is at an all-time high. So screw the bloody apocalypse. I am pushing forward, and I have each and every one of you to thank for watching my content on such a regular basis. Yeah! Being a small-time YouTube content creator, I am essentially no more than a grain of salt in a massive YouTube ocean. So all of my patrons really do help me out. Even donating as little as $1 a month makes a difference to this channel. So anybody who is kind enough to do that can send me questions on my Patreon page, and I will answer them in these videos once a month. So let's get answering some of my questions from all of my lovely patrons. Okay, let's have a look at some of these questions. First one from Lee Harris. Do you have a certain generation of console home computers that you really struggle to go back and play? You see, Lee, I think I partially answered this question in a video I uploaded about a week ago. I would say the 32-bit / 64-bit generation is probably the harder games to go back to. Early 3D is just a little bit ugly, isn't it? And some of the controls are very primitive. Like, I done a video on why the Nintendo 64 is overrated, and the main reason for that was because it mainly only offered early 3D games and not enough 2D content on the platform. If we go to the PlayStation, for example, there was a lot of good 2D content, but if we look at their early 3D content, it's worse than the 64's. Like, I think it's absolutely ridiculous, basically, that you've got early 3D games on that console that do not offer analog support. You've got to try and control games with a D-pad. So there's a lot of games on that platform what expect you to play early 3D games with a D-pad, which is horrible in my opinion. So the hardest generation to go back to, I would say, is the 32 / 64-bit one, as I stated before. However, there is still a lot of fun and enjoyment to be had from it, as there is with any other console generation. And obviously all generations have their pros and their cons, in my opinion. Next question from Jack of All. Strange one, but what are your favourite racing games on each generation? Now, Jack, I wouldn't exactly call myself a racing game connoisseur, but I've still managed to compile some sort of list of what I say are my favourites. I would say, from the 8-bit generation, Micro Machines. I really do like the Micro Machines games, particularly the 16-bit ones, but if we're going to go 8-bit, I'm going to say Micro Machines. 16-bit, I'd say it was a bit of a toss-up between Super Mario Kart and F-Zero, but ultimately I've decided to go for F-Zero. Just a shame it doesn't offer 2-player on that game, isn't it? Next one, 32-bit / 64. I have gone for Mario Kart 64. I genuinely do feel that's probably the ultimate racing game from that generation. I'd say honourable mention as well to Diddy Kong Racing, and I suppose it was the birth of the Gran Turismo games as well, which I've always found fun. Next generation, PlayStation 2, GameCube, Xbox. I'm going to say Gran Turismo in that one, because I played Mario Kart Double Dash, and personally I felt that game was a huge letdown. I didn't really think it built on much from the previous Mario Kart games. I didn't think it really offered anything new or interesting. Next generation, 360, Wii, PS3. But to be honest with you, I don't think I've played any racing games at all over that period. Nothing really tickled my fancy, as nothing really stood out enough. I played Mario Kart Wii, and again I felt that was even more inferior to the one on the GameCube. It offered even less, apart from that horrible motion control gimmick. Motion control, did anybody really like that? I certainly didn't. And then we get to this generation, is it this generation now? But PS4, Xbox One, and Wii U. And I must say, I really did like Mario Kart 8. I felt it had a massive upswing from the previous games in the series for some reason, and I just found that installment really enjoyable. I think Mario Kart 8 is the best Mario Kart game we have had for absolute years. So that has been my opinion on racing games over the last 30 years. Question from Ian A. Chapman: do you rather have fully customizable characters and weapons, or old school character select screens and just getting standard issue? Definitely the old school character select screen. I am very much a pick up and play man, and the quicker I can get into the swing of gameplay, the better. I don't like any of this faffing about with tutorials, character creation, none of that nonsense. In fact, if I wanted to create a character, I would play with a bloody action man, wouldn't I? I'd just buy an action man and change the clothes on that. I don't need that in my game. It doesn't make the experience any more immersive. If anything, I feel it makes the experience less immersive, because if you're customising a character, that means in all likelihood the developers haven't wrote any storyline or anything around that character, because that character is essentially meant to be you. I already know me. I don't want to be me in a computer game as well. I'm already me, so I don't want to play as me as well. A question from Edward O'Reilly: what are your favourite memories of playing 2-player or more games with friends and family? Well, when I was younger, the two main people I used to play multiplayer games with was my younger brother and my uncle. And I've wrote down a few of my games we used to play a lot. We played a lot of Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64, a lot of Bomberman games, Street Fighter games, Mario Kart, GoldenEye, Killer Instincts and Tekkens. Very generic selections if you ask me. But that was the time period, I would say. Gaming on the sofa with your friends and family was the best. They literally made great games for that time period. So I think they're generic selections of games, but I don't think I could have picked better ones. Let me know if you can think of better games I could have been playing over that period, multiplayer wise. Actually Edward, your question has reminded me of something. Last month I was spending some time in Australia, as many of you will know. And whilst I was there, I was actually in fact visiting my brother. And whilst I was there, we did in fact play quite a few multiplayer games. And one of the games we was indulging in was Game Goemon 2 for the Super Famicom. When we was younger, we were massive fans of the Mystical Ninja game by Konami on the Super Nintendo. However, its sequels, 2, 3 and 4, were never released outside of Japan. So it was great to finally catch up on the sequel to Mystical Ninja with him, which he's been wanting to play essentially for about 20 years. So we actually had a full run through of that game, which was great fun. I've obviously played through the game myself plenty of times, but it was the first time I've played the game co-op. It was actually really nice to play a game for the Super Nintendo cooperatively, because there wasn't many games that offered that functionality, if I remember. The only one that comes to mind was Bomberman. So it's a huge shame that Game Goemon 2 never saw a Western release, because it's just such a fun multiplayer experience. Final question of the day from Tony Nix. Now Tony, I must say I do really like your question. In fact, I liked it so much I've made it the thumbnail of this video. Your question: what are some games that you were very hyped to play but were disappointed in once you played? You see Tony, that's happened plenty of times. So I've compiled a little list of the most notable entries there. Before I answer the question, let's talk a little bit about hype first. Hype. It can be induced in so many ways, can't it? Sometimes the bloody companies themselves make you feel hyped about the games through promotional material, etc. Other times it can be simply from friends recommending a game to you, which actually sometimes turns out to be not quite your taste. And other times it's just self-induced hype through playing as an earlier game in a series of games, for example, Before I get to answering these questions, I just want to say I'm having to bloody move this all the time with my finger so the screen doesn't look up. So apologies if I keep looking at the screen rather than the camera every now and again. But anyway, I've compiled a little list of games so I don't go off track with this. Firstly, I would say any Alex Kidd game that was released after Miracle World. Alex Kidd in Miracle World, or was it Miracle Land, I can't quite remember, was a fantastic little gem. But sadly, any game I played in the series after that didn't quite live up to my expectations in terms of quality. Next on my list I have Mario is Missing. I think the game probably destroyed many children's childhoods because if you look at the box art of the game looks bloody so interesting and fantastic. Like, we all loved Super Mario World, so if you see some box art essentially with the same art style as Mario World, like all the screenshots is the same art style, and it's basically Bowser pulling Mario away and Luigi just looking like he's going into business for himself. That game looks fantastic, doesn't it? It looks like a sequel to Mario World, but no, it's horrible educational tat. And not the good kind of educational either. Like, I've travelled around the world like bloody Luigi and Yoshi in that game, and I can tell you that game is nothing like the real life experience. Travelling around the world is fun. Travelling around the world in Mario is Missing as boring as bloody crap, I suppose. Next one, Bomberman Hero. Now that game was a letdown. I actually rather enjoyed Mario 64 when that game came out. I even went to the effort of collecting all the gold cards in that game to unlock the final world, which was very difficult but very fun at the same time. Bomberman Hero, on the other hand, it just had horrible controls and it felt like the game was programmed completely differently, which I assume it was. But only saving grace for that game, I would say, was the ridiculous amount of drum and bass music it had in the game. Like, if you play it now, it just feels so ridiculously late 90s so for the music. But yes, Bomberman Hero, definitely the worst Bomberman game I have played at that point in my life. Next game on my list, Yoshi's Story. I touched on this in a recent video as well. Yoshi's Island was such a fantastic game. Yoshi's Story being a pseudo prequel to that game, you'd assume would be fantastic as well. But again, it was just different. Like, the controls are pretty similar, but it just felt so short and unfulfilling in comparison to Yoshi's Island. It just lacked in content, especially when you consider that game was on a 64-bit system and Yoshi's Island was on a 16-bit system as well. Next on the list I have SmackDown Just Bring It. SmackDown Just Bring It. This game to me was the start in decline of wrestling games qualities. Like, every game I played before then was on the up and up. All the Aki games on the Nintendo 64 were bloody brilliant. So playing a wrestling game on the PlayStation 2 for the first time, which is a massive upgrade from a Nintendo 64, you would expect to be fantastic, wouldn't you? But again, it was one of those games that just severely lacked in content. Like, I think I'd done everything you could possibly do in that game by the time Christmas Day was over, and I had nothing left to do. It was just so short in comparison to all the Aki games on the Nintendo 64, and even SmackDown and SmackDown 2 on the original PlayStation. So yes, SmackDown Just Bring It. Horrible. And it had bloody Fred Durst in it as well, which is another reason to hate it. Next one, what really annoyed me was Halo, surprisingly enough. I know a lot of people seem to love this game, but for me, it was when I started hating on first-person shooters. Before then, it was just always another genre for me. And the reason why I think I hated it so much was the amount of hype surrounding it. Like, from what I gather, it did have a crazy advertising campaign, but that wasn't really what bothered me. It was I wasn't a child, I would say it was I was about 17 or 18, so it was the other students I went to college with. They was really hyping up Halo like it was something special. And when I was playing it, it was crap basically. Like, I couldn't really see what it delivered. It just felt really bland. Like, I was told it was, oh, Halo, it's the best game ever. But it just, I can't really put my finger on it. It just didn't tickle my fancy. And that felt like the blueprint for many first-person shooters to come. So Halo, no, not for me. Next on the list, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. From what I understand, those games are pretty popular these days. From my personal perspective, I should imagine the only reason they are so popular is because maybe it was a lot of people's first ever Pokemon games, like people who are now in their early 20s, I suppose, seem to worship the games. In fact, Nintendo have even re-released and remade the games recently for the 3DS. And those are the first games in the Pokemon series I've not even bothered going to the effort of playing, because I really do think Generation 3 of Pokemon is by far the worst, basically. I just didn't like the direction the series was going at the time. Like, let's think back. Nintendo had always essentially rammed a catchphrase down our throat for a good few years: got to catch them all. It was like, gotta catch them all, gotta catch them all. That was the main thing you were supposed to do in Pokemon, was catch every single one of the little buggers. So what did they do when they released Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire? Leave half of the bloody Pokemon out. What was that all about? Absolutely ridiculous. No Squirtle, no Charmander, no Bulbasaur, no Mewtwo, no Zapdos, no Articuno, no Moltres, etc. Most of the bloody cool Pokemon wasn't even in the game. So what was the point in playing a bloody Pokemon game where you can't catch them all? Nintendo themselves had told us for absolute years that was the whole point of playing a Pokemon game. You was meant to go on some OCD rampage collecting all of them. And suddenly, you couldn't. They didn't include all of them in the game, which I found outrageous. So for that reason, I can't see any reason why anyone other than nostalgia would possibly pick Ruby and Sapphire as their favourite Pokemon games, because they're the only games in the series you can't catch them all in. Next on my list, Legend of Zelda, drum roll, The Wind Waker. I remember at the time, many people's complaints was that they really didn't like the art style. Like, so many people online was going, this isn't Zelda, we don't want it to look like this, it's too cartoony, it's too childish. Moaning about a Nintendo product being too childish. Come on, grow up! Nintendo's a toy company, you bloody idiots, it should be bloody cartoonish. But anyway, that was not my complaint. My complaint about Wind Waker, it just felt like the game really did lack in content. Like most of the games I've complained about on this list, was the fact that they lacked in content compared to their predecessors. Like, there was just so many less temples and challenges to undergo in Wind Waker than what we got with the Ocarina of Time or Link to the Past, which were my two favourite Zelda games previously, and probably my favourite Zelda games to this day. Apart from that as well, there was too much sea, wasn't there? Did we really want to waste so much time just going in the sea, just going? They tried to create a sense of making the world look really big, like which they do with many sandbox games, but essentially just made a really, really big, boring world instead. So Wind Waker, it's a good game, but I just didn't live up to the hype for me personally. It wasn't as good as Ocarina of Time, wasn't even close. The next game, one I must say I do rather appreciate now, but absolutely hated with a vengeance at the time, was Final Fantasy XII. Like, I know you hear a lot of people complaining about 13, but Final Fantasy XII was the first... No. That's raised another point, actually. Final Fantasy X-2, that annoyed me as well, but let's talk about 12. That probably annoyed me even more. But 12, I just didn't like it. Like, previous Final Fantasy games, all, from my experience, had very interesting stories. They all had great story arcs and that. Final Fantasy 12, it just seemed so boring to me. It was like the original... Not the original... The Star Wars prequel trilogy. It was just all about politics and very boring. Such a boring storyline in that game. It was politics, wasn't it? It was all about kings and queens and dethroning each other and politics, and it was very boring, like Captain Bosch von Ronsenberger of Dalmasca and all that crap. I didn't like it. Anyway, and the battle system as well. I was very partial to turn-based games. I loved turn-based at the time, and suddenly I lost the full turn-based swirling into battle experience with that one, and they tried something new. So yes, Final Fantasy XII, but Apple just fell far too far from the tree for me to personally enjoy. I wanted a traditional Final Fantasy game really, and 12 didn't quite deliver this at the time, but I must say, compared to many JRPGs we've got later on in time, 12 is rather enjoyable by today's standards, which brings me on to another game which I was really, really hyped about, but then later disappointed me. Xenoblade Bloody X. The reason is because I actually found Xenoblade Chronicles the most enjoyable JRPG I've played in recent years. So you can imagine I'm going to be ultra hyped about Xenoblade X. It was basically the game I looked forward to most on the entire Wii U platform. But when I got to it, instead of getting a simple JRPG game where you follow a narrative structure, instead I've got one of these open sandbox world games, which I don't like. The same reason I didn't like Breath of the Wild. I don't like these open sandbox games where you're just essentially encouraged to go out and explore and do what the bloody hell you want. I want a compelling story, not to explore some huge landmass with not a lot going on in it. So for that reason, I wanted Xenoblade X to be just like Xenoblade Chronicles, when in fact it was more like Skyrim, I suppose, but just a really crap version of Skyrim. So those are the games which I was really, really hyped for and did not quite live up to my expectations. So once again, I would like to thank everybody for supporting me over the last few months and getting my channel to a level it's not been previously before. And apart from that as well, I would once again like to thank all of the patrons for their regular donations. Like, you really do make it feel like I'm entertaining you, basically. If you're giving me donations, you clearly like the content enough to want me to just carry on making it and as much as possible. So thank you for that. That is a nice little pat on the back. So yes, you're giving me all these pats on the back. So thank you for your pats on the back. I really appreciate it. Cheerio. Yeah.